Hi, welcome to another episode of Saturday Architecture. This week we have my long-term friend, my colleague from Microsoft, Gaurav, on the call with us. And I was very surprised with the number of certifications that he had. Enormous amount of certifications, and I've seen him do that constantly for the past 20 years. And he runs a business. He's not just a technologist, he's an architect. He's good in a lot of technologies, SharePoint, desktop, and probably one of the very few souls on the earth who has expertise on something called Enterprise Project Management Server. So I asked him, how does he manage to do these certifications to begin with, considering he's a business leader, and this is what he had to say.
That's easy to make a statement, but how many of our leaders have done even a single certification? And that hit me bad. I said, okay, let's talk about after a week. And a single week, I went ahead 12 certification and said back to back. And then somebody told me I guess from the relevant certification, the max that has been done by anyone was around 14. I said, okay, let me go and beat that number. So another 2 weeks, I went and did another 12 of those. So now in last 6-7 weeks, probably I've done probably 22 certifications on Microsoft. Wow. But what I did was to communicate a message that if a vice president who is responsible for business can do it, our project managers, our architects can do it. So don't give me a crap of saying I don't have time, I have customer billability and things like that. And other thing that I told them was don't have a fear of failure. If you go and waste an exam voucher which is funded by Microsoft, don't worry. I will figure out another voucher for you. And the moment I did those two things, it just turned around. So that way it helped in pushing myself, lead by example, but telling everybody that don't worry about the failure. I guess that's the key message. And if somebody who's responsible to run business can do it, people who are in delivery should be able to do it anyway.
I think this should be inspiring for people. This should be very inspiring for people to do it. I am one of those people who's very poor, and like Kumaran, who is very poor on certifications. I will do it only if I have to do it. So somebody like Gaurav has to drive me to do it.
All of us claim that we are hands-on. Okay? I guess most of the people that I see on the call would love to claim that, hey, we understand business, we are a thought leader, and we are hands-on too. And the best way to tell people and to test yourself that what does this hands-on mean? It's like objective is not that I want to compete with a fresher in terms of writing the code, but are you still able to correlate? It's like we used to be .NET expert in writing whatever we had to write, but are we able to think like a IoT developer? What does it take to do something on IoT edge? Or what does it take to be writing some Python scripts to be a data scientist? Now, giving certification, that's one part of it. If somebody says, can I go and start delivering a data science project? I would probably take 2 times, 3 times the time of a fresher to write that. Because I'm not expected to do that. But point is, the moment you do that, one, you feel a little bit connected with that statement that I'm hands-on. Second thing which I've realized in last couple of years is, as CTOs are becoming more and more relevant in the business, and most of those CTOs are fairly hands-on. They really want you to be in a position as a SI, wherein as a leader, or an exec sponsor, you should be able to help in troubleshooting conversation. They don't want you to troubleshoot at a hands-on level, but sitting in a meeting with them and saying, hey, what are the possible causes? Do that triage with them. That's something which I realize if you keep yourself hands-on, that helps in building that relationship with those CTOs. This relationship with CIO could be just about business value, your conversation, but with CTO conversation goes fairly different. And with digital transformation, I'm seeing CTOs becoming more and more powerful as compared to a CIO. Today, a chief digital officer would trust a CTO more as compared to a CIO.
So what else do you do to keep current and keep yourself hands-on besides certification? What else do you do?
I knew that's coming.
Let me just add another question to that, right? There's always this debate, right? We've had this conversations for decades, you and me, Gaurav. Like, I'm a high level guy. I'm an architect. Do I have to do code? So I think it's kind of related.
Sure. So, see, one is till the time we started getting into a lot of this public cloud conversation, my way of learning was to pick up any three problems that I encountered in last couple of projects and try and solve those using the new technology. And if I'm able to do that, I felt I'm ready to give certification, apply that knowledge. But with public cloud, I gave up that way of learning because very early I realized that I would not be able to keep up. None of us can keep pace with the agility that any of this public cloud provider has respect to releasing new technology, new frameworks and things like that. And I shifted to something different by saying it's more important to know who is the subject matter expert on a particular technology or framework instead of being the subject matter expert yourself. So build your network, know who is a better person to talk about IoT in Azure versus IoT in AWS. And if you're able to ask the right question to both those guys, only thing that I have to do is to correlate. And today that's what I do. I just correlate what I have learned in my past experience with the new technology and trust my network that guy is telling me the true experience instead of theory. What I do is I just keep on building my network of saying who is the best expert available inside company or outside company, and have a simple conversation. Say, what are you doing? What have you learned? What works? What doesn't work? Simple conversation that tells me where the problem set is. And then my job allows me to probably create some of the side projects with them. That's where I would say I'm a little bit lucky that my organization now and earlier Microsoft allowed me to create or gave me sufficient budget to create those side projects. And what those side projects allows me to do is to start contributing, and that's where I can test the correlation. So key takeaway, build your network. Don't try and read or do hands-on on every damn thing that comes your way. And start trusting your network. And that's the only way to keep pace with what's happening in the technology domain today. It's like every 30 days there is a new buzzword, there is a new framework.
Usually all these buzzwords, they end up being maybe 10, 15, 20% of the new business. The existing 80% of your previous knowledge, is that, Sumit, this is what I'm asking you from the perspective of the learning, the application. So the 20% of what you find out which is happening new, is that generating more business, or it is that 80% which is generating more business?
Sure, I think, yeah, great question. See, today I would say as our organization, we are probably 40% of our business is in those buzzwords. And that's probably possible because of the inheritance that we get from our two parents, Accenture and Microsoft. Because most of the customer base that I deal with, we would have those fairly long relationship, just not at an IT stakeholder, but at a business stakeholder. And some of these buzzwords, whether we like it or not, are implementable if the business stakeholder goes ahead and says, I want to do something around that. Because as a CIO, people would like to say, hey, I just want to have something to be done with blockchain, something to be done with IoT, but they don't know what that should be. But if you can get, let's say, a recent conversation with a stakeholder in a large mining company, she said, I need to do something different in my business, the way I do some of my supply chain for the mining business. CIO for long was saying, I want to do something around IoT and a little bit of edge computing. And we could never make a way beyond $50,000 of POC. business, I give a damn shit to $50,000 of POC because it doesn't make it profitable. But the moment we had that business stakeholder saying, I want to do something, I'm willing to take a risk, we were able to do something different. Even the pilot itself was almost like $1 million, because what we committed to pilot in that case was a cost saving within pilot and bring Microsoft funding to it. So portion of that is you can actually create a fairly big business with buzzwords, provided you can bring in a little bit of skin in the game, either through your own investment as a firm or use the cash cow funding that public cloud providers are willing to provide. If you can build a business case which says, if this project goes successful, how much money Microsoft or AWS would make with the consumption, you can easily assume 20% of that they will be willing to invest. Use that 20% as part of your business case. That probably allows me to have that buzzword related business, which is as high as 40% in the portfolio. And which brings back to that, don't think like an architect, or sometimes think like a startup entrepreneur, that how you can change the business case definition and make it real by bringing in some sort of an investment. The other thing which is the second part, that what happens to the traditional business. I would say it's a slow journey. Traditional business definitely is a little bit more profitable. So while I can say 40% of portfolio is new buzzword, but where do I make more money? More money is still being made in terms of profitability in the tried and tested business. And being in SI business, I'm sure it's not a hidden secret that you probably make much more margins if you have a long-term managed services to give you annuity and predictability. Now, definitely, if you understand cloud economics fairly well, you can rotate your managed services or traditional business a little different. And that probably defines the difference between how somebody like HCL, who is known for infra world, would look at their annuity business versus somebody like Accenture Avanade, who is known for innovation and management consulting. And that's probably the differentiator. So one, think a little bit like an entrepreneur, make your business case a little bit better. Because buzzwords, the project of buzzword, none of them have ever given me more than $50,000 of POC. If you bring in value along with it, you can convert your proof of concept to something what I love calling as proof of architecture. That don't say I need to do a POC because it doesn't reflect well at me. I'm not sure, Kumar, if you recall, but as MCS, I never told any of my customer that I want to do a POC. People
I remember.
hate me that, hey, I wanted to tell you I will do a POC, but I never told any customer as MCS that I will do a POC. Said, I'm confident, let's go and do production. If as MCS charging $1,000 a day, if my answer is I need to do a POC, then how are you differentiating from $100 a day person in India?
Very good point. And I think probably you kind of intuitively started executing an MVP in spirit or in principle.
Yeah.
Right. But the words MVP, Agile and all came much later, right? After 2005, where it started picking up steam. But what you're actually telling is a real instance of doing an MVP without calling it an MVP.
Yeah. See, sometimes coining a particular word requires a little bit of social currency kind of a people who also have a flavor of marketing. So the problem with technologists like us is we can acquire the business side of skills, but we will never be good marketers. And a lot of this ahead of the curve coining of a particular buzzword and things like that requires that marketing mindset. I can give you examples, like each one of us has been talking about loosely coupling and things like that. And somebody in our firm 2 years back said, what do you mean by loose coupling? Let's call it as digital decoupling.
Okay.
Yeah. Now today, if you go and search on Google, you will find huge amount of businesses being built with digital decoupling. Below digital decoupling, it's exactly the same thing that we were doing for ages by doing loose coupling. But somebody with a marketing brain said digital transformation is a buzzword. We understand problems can be solved with decoupling things. Let's merge the two buzzwords and make it a marketing term. That's one thing. I think if people are looking at saying, hey, how do I change the way I look at the business, or how do I grow as a professional? If you're a technologist, learn business. If you are a technologist and you have learned business, then I would say learn marketing.
Actually, that's pretty interesting. It kind of gives me a confidence. I think in the program which we start, right, one of the key things I have been advising, and a lot of people in the call here, is storytelling, which is nothing but that as a skill, right? You put it very well. In fact, like a couple of episodes before, we were actually having a conversation why storytelling is important for architects, and I can kind of relate to it, right? Marketing is about your ability to tell the story of how a technology will make a difference. But as you're talking, then this slide actually came up. I saw it on LinkedIn. Yuri Minsk had actually commented on this.
Yeah.
If you look at it, right, it's kind of interesting. The core or the legacy systems, right? Still, this survey was done with technology leaders. And 45% of them were thinking that's where digital needs to be spent, whereas in customer experiences, and 88% has to be spent. But the irony is, in the enterprise space, most of the budget kind of still goes towards the core or the legacy. So would you agree? What's your take on that? I think if you take up IT spend, the core of the spend is towards maintenance, enhancements, kind of stuff. Do you think that percentage, my guess is it's still 60-70% goes there, and only the 70 comes with the, let's call it, the latest requirement being done with few digital technologies patched together?
Sure. So, in terms of what was required by large enterprises, I think the chart that you showed is a true reflection of what I have been seeing in the business. But in reality, most of the money went for keep the lights on, whether it is for legacy or even for legacy plus whatever was built on distributed platforms. So key is, instead of innovating or doing some new business model, that's what digital transformation should be doing. The money was still going on maintaining the status quo of the portfolio that was built over a period of time. I think the smartest customer that I saw in the market still was doing probably 64% of their IT budget for keep the lights on. And that's the lowest that I saw in last 4 years or so and I have seen as high as around 90% budget on keep the lights on. Now, on one hand, as a business leader, I feel happy because that means I have done a good job of selling them the annuity business that they can't come out of. But that also means that I can't build my business or rotate my business to those new buzzwords. Or as a human, as the human impact side of things starts kicking in, especially if you're dealing with public sector, healthcare, and in the current time frame. So the change that I would say two part of the puzzle here. One, what was happening pre-COVID. So pre-COVID, it was more about saying, let's figure out a business case that how do you help me in saving money from the legacy modernization, but I will not give you that money till the time you are able to use that for innovation. So your IT budget is remaining constant. Only thing that we are doing is shifting the money that you are spending and keep the lights on to the innovation part. And that's how today I'm seeing customers are shifting, that I don't want to reduce my IT budget just for the sake of it. Help me in increasing my budget that I spend on the innovation side of things. That's pre-COVID scenario. Okay? Now, in last 4 months or so, I've seen one more pattern emerging, which says whatever we were doing in the business that reduced my keep the lights on and use that saving for innovation. But within that, now people are saying all that has to happen, but somehow give me a better resiliency. So instead of saying anything to do with resiliency, and sometimes resiliency could mean scalability, sometimes resiliency to a customer could mean remote working, and most of the time I have seen readiness for failures and disaster recovery. But they are not willing to put that as part of innovation. They are saying that's part of your keep the light on. The challenge that I have is how do I absorb that portion of it? Because we definitely want to put that portion to innovation, that we are helping you in transforming to be more resilient. So nowadays, I guess every customer talks about help me becoming more resilient and help me becoming more agile on my transformation journey. And how it is manifesting is earlier it was easier for companies to go and sell a couple of $1 million for doing assessments and give them a 200-page report which nobody would be able to digest and use, and wherein they would have given you a business case per application. Versus customers saying, come on, go to hell, I don't want to pay you even a single dollar for assessment. If you're telling you are a cloud expert, you have been doing digital transformation, why do you need assessment? By this time, you should have a pattern which says, look at my portfolio, give me a percentage, what portfolio can be transformed, what can go to cloud. And let's agree on a range plus minus 5%, and let's go with it. Because even after a couple of million of assessment, you are still doing discovery, you are still doing design, which cost money. It's like couple of weeks back, we were having conversation with a couple of CXOs and said, guys, earlier he was looking at $2 million for discovery and assessment. I'm giving you $2 million back because I don't want you to do discovery and assessment. And he threw that back at us and said, $2 million paid to you upfront. Because I don't want to do discovery, I'm willing to take a risk, start moving my workload to cloud.
Nice. So this is a new pattern that you are seeing emerging, correct? I think, and it's kind of interesting, right? We've seen that diagram with that park and the swing, right? Architect versus what was implemented and what happened. And there's a lot of, and I think even in our share of experience with Microsoft, right? There were so many POCs which never sees days of light, or even pilots, right? They just go and then they never come. And I think this is something which we have been talking in previous episodes, just loss of credibility of IT itself. And architects actually kind of dropping the ball on that, right? Because there's nobody else really owning in a true sense, customer success and happiness, which is only after the value that is being delivered. So it's kind of good to hear what you're telling is that now the system itself is forcing people to get to that place.
Yes.
And make that happen. I heard one large company, we know, probably if I talk a little bit, you'll figure that out. They had to go on Teams and they were resisting it for 2 to 3 years. So they set up an infrastructure lab, test users like that. Should we have app 1 going, app 2 going, like that? COVID hits. In a period of 6 weeks, close to 200,000 employees have moved to Teams. I think that constraint on the resource, right, actually makes you a little bit more, pushes you towards innovation. But in that thing, right, one question that is always a challenge is when we are working on an existing workload, which is a legacy system, the business functionality kind of remains the same, right? We can make some change, but shifting it to it's not exactly a lift and shift, but you're still shifting that functionality. In that case, right, there is a value getting unlocked. How do we show that to the actual business? Maybe that will help us show that, yeah, an innovation is happening, because to him it's the same screen or maybe a slightly different screen, correct? But let's say airline booking, some of the guys here on transportation, they know that a lot of airline booking and hotel booking is still running on legacy systems.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm going to shift that business capability to a cloud, the end user still sees the same. As you said, when you go to cloud, resilience increases, on-demand cost will come. How do you show that to the business user? This makes sense for the IT guy.
Sure. So good question. So see, there are multiple ways in which we address it. Okay. Now, instead of disclosing everything, let me give you an example which has worked most of the time. See, today people say, I want to monetize my data. And you would see a lot of customers trying to do this big data lake and things like that. How about as an architect, when you are doing a legacy transformation, moving it to cloud, bring whatever data you have in those legacy systems into data lake. And build your new functionality for analytics, machine learning, whatever you want to do on that data lake. So I'm saying, don't think like an application architect alone. Think like an enterprise architect and say, if I'm taking my data to data lake anyway, because of whatever reason for audit, compliance and things like that, how about ensuring take some more data, maybe which was still sitting in legacy travel systems. If that data also moves to that data lake, now you have a flexibility to build whatever new functionality, especially if it is not facing the end user. So if today an airline wants to send a very personalized content and says, hey, as a loyal customer, your loyalty points was expiring, we extended it by some duration. And by the way, since you was traveling most of the time on sector A, from destination A to destination B, whenever we start, we want to do a 30% discount and give you double the mileage point. So if you want to build that kind of a model, which is where user is not interfacing with the system directly, but you could do new innovation, new marketing, new way of making money out of it. So I would say think like an enterprise architect, because if you think like a database architect or application architect, it's a difficult problem to solve.
And
the enterprise architect question keeps coming back.
Okay, go ahead, Deepak. Same question I had.
So in your world, how you are seeing enterprise architects actually help with the problems which you are trying to solve? Because in number of ways, in fact, some of the architects who have become digital advisors within large organizations, they are saying enterprise architecture has no meaning anymore. This is no longer in the agile world. This makes no sense. You got to just make money. That's it.
Sure.
And also probably the legacy of enterprise architectures, right? We have had this big strategy maps and people locked up in big rooms, and then you have version 2 of the strategy map. What are you planning to do? I'm planning to do version 3 of the strategy map. You've been there, right? So how do we handle that?
So I would say most of the enterprise architecture became more of a theory instead of action oriented. Now in today's time, if you are looking at your enterprise architecture with a perspective or a lens of taking action instead of just embracing the problem. See, enterprise architects are probably the best created creature within IT portfolios of any company, wherein they will keep on admiring the problem of saying, yeah, these are problem, this is complex, and they will never take a decision of doing something. On a paper, they want to solve a problem, but they will never go ahead and say, out of my $1 million which I've invested in Archimate licenses, let me give $100,000 a quarter to do something in real. I think that's the part which is going to change, and it would change very, very fast. So if you will start talking to thought leaders within TOGAF world or Zekman world, you will find a mindset change required that don't admire the problem, solve the problem, take decisions. You would fail, that's fine.
This is one thing good about Gaurav, right? He has this way of not mincing words, and when you hear him, you don't know whether you have to laugh, smile, or cringe. Okay, so he has this way of putting it, right? And that's actually that's your style, and that's pretty enjoyable. Yes, it's hard, but I think it's also enjoyable at the same time. And I think you kind of stated that problem very well. It's about, we spend so much of time in defining the problem that we hardly, as enterprise architects, the part to getting to solving it doesn't happen. And then you're going after defining the next problem. I think, so the key message, I guess what you're telling is, shift to, okay, identifying a problem is good, but also take responsibility for action and executing it. In other words, I think it's kind of related to what you said some time back, right? Outside the organization, you have these big 5 consulting companies coming, doing an assessment discovery and giving a 300-page PPT. Nothing happens. Enterprise architecture, inside the organization, the same pattern of behavior is executed. Kind of, you think a lot of things, produce a large artifact, but no action happens again.
Yeah, and that's true. And the other thing is, as you start learning or looking at your business, okay, sometimes apply your data side of business. Okay, I'll give you an example. See, today you go to any customer and you look at a portfolio of anything more than 500 apps, 1000 apps plus. Whether you do assessment or not, if you have done sufficient of cloud transformation work, you should be able to look at, and there are data available. If it means you have to go and source some data from Gartner, Forrester, or Everest, go and do that. But within a vertical, how different a particular customer would be in travel and logistics from any other customer? If you have been doing cloud transformation by saying, hey, I'm an expert in this vertical, you should have ratio, which says, I think 40% of your applications are good for platform as a service, 60% are still going to be infrastructure as a service, and maybe 5% remains on-premise. As an architect, it's just not about solving customers' problem. The other job that organization expect you to do is, how are you helping the business to grow from our own company perspective? You can be innovative, do whatever you want to do to create new offerings. That's one part of it. But the other part that we ignore is how you can reduce your cost of sales. Have a huge amount of money that you invest in figuring out what should be my rough order of magnitude price. And then you invest another cycle in saying what would be my firm price for any proposal or any project. And if you start applying whatever you have learned from a data analytics perspective, you should be able to reduce that cost. I'll give you an example, okay? Something to think about. And I'm not claiming that we do it today, but if I think aloud, if today you go and have a conversation about managing whatever cloud footprint a customer has, you can spend days and days and weeks to analyze what they are running in a cloud. And then tell them what would be my managed services cost for managing that cloud footprint or a typical infrastructure outsourcing. Typically, if you are looking at 3000 virtual machine kind of a footprint, your pre-sales cost easily would start touching more than $300,000 or so. how about thinking like very simple? I will go out today if you are willing to take a little bit of a risk, you could try a simple model. Go and ask that customer how much you are investing, how much you are paying AWS today or Azure today as a bill. If that is X, as a business, you should be able to figure out a pattern that if somebody is paying X dollars to a hyperscaler, and what is my managed services in my existing customer? Trust me, ballpark, you will come to 30-35%.
I didn't get that. Can you explain that? What the managed services is like? What?
Managed services, if you look at in a system integration business, managed services is about, hey, I've done the migration, but somebody still has to manage.
Okay.
From a perspective of ensuring a little bit of patch management happens, you are monitoring it, you are fixing the problems and things like that. And that's a huge business for any system integrator. That's a huge business. Unfortunately, MCS doesn't do that business. But Infosys, HCLs of the world, Accentures of the world, probably huge money is being made there. And when you are looking at from a customer perspective, keep the lights on. That money of keep the lights on is going on hardware contracts, your physical data center contracts. But the biggest ticket item after that is the managed services contract that you have signed with SIs.
That's basically L1, L2, L3 work.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. And in a system integration world, people don't like using L1, L2, L3. That's probably a taxonomy that premier services prefer. So it's like we start talking in terms of infrastructure outsourcing, app outsourcing, and cloud managed service. So that kind of a Uber level stuff.
Okay.
And the example that I was giving you was that if I have to go and sell a managed service, and somebody says 3,000 virtual machine running in AWS, tell me how much will you charge me for it?
Okay.
And if you have a trust, this is your cloud bill, how much discount you are getting from AWS or Microsoft? Because I want to have a baseline by saying, are you getting 30% discount from AWS or 10% discount? So that I know the baseline.
Yeah, if you see from the manufacturing company's perspective, you remember, when you buy any equipment and says, what is the annual maintenance cost for it? That they simply have a standard number. He says, we don't care. They say, okay, 10% we are going to charge for AMC. And that's it. And it doesn't matter what goes wrong with it. We have just covered it, everything. So why can't we do that in the cloud world?
Right? So in the cloud world today, I would love to be in a scenario where people can just, and that's what I do today. So if I have to go and do a cloud managed services contract, my pre-sales cost is not more than 4 hours.
I mean, that itself is
directly money in the bank. That is directly money in the bank. The amount of money which you don't spend on doing the pre-sales is directly money in the bank.
Cash flow.
And you could start building interesting financial constructs around it by saying, hey, since I'm taking a risk, let's do a little bit of risk and benefit award with it. Okay, so how about bundling a little bit of using that entrepreneurship? So some of the models that I have started seeing is, if you know the cloud bill, 30% of that is my managed services.
Oh, flat. Okay.
Okay.
Brilliant.
Now,
yeah.
And you could go a little bit more risk-free by saying this percentage could differ by customer size or by vertical, because you understand a little bit of complexity there. That's one way of looking at it. Your pre-sales cost becomes zero. But why would customer trust? Because on other hand, you have another person who is saying, I'm going to give you 6 weeks, 2% will be onshore, they will figure out something and do blah, blah, blah. Good. Go do that. You are putting that money. I would say I'm going to give you that, whatever that 6 week is, as my investment to establish a baseline, and you could use it for any kind of an innovation project that you would like to do with me. And if that innovation project goes in production, I make money with it.
Okay.
other thing that I have done to accelerate with on a very similar way, it's like thinking about converting a solution architect into somebody who's like leading a business. As in a cloud world, your cloud bill should never be constant. And if you have a customer which says, I'm investing $10 million with Microsoft for last 2 years, to me, what it tells is somebody has done a shitty job. And customer has not understood the cloud economics. And that's where I would say cloud is less of technology. For me, it's more of financial engineering. So if you really want to be a good cloud architect, I would say stop reading about technology in cloud, start reading about cloud economics. You would, trust me, you will be more successful if you read about cloud economics. And for that matter, now there are a couple of certifications in that area too. So if you want to test some of your knowledge, you could do that too.
Wow. Okay. What are the certifications phrases for them?
So you could go and search for, let's say, FinOps organization, okay, and you'll find cloud optimization certifications with them. There are a few more which exist. The reason why I'm saying that is how you could start leveraging and growing your businesses is you could do commercial models around it. So that if I extend the same example of saying 30% of your cloud bill as my managed services bill, but how about making it a risk and reward proposition by saying, Mr. Customer, against a baseline, if I reduce your cloud bill year on year by 30%, you pay me 60% of that 30% cost saving as my reward. And if I don't do it, don't pay me for 1 month of managed service.
They're putting skin in the game on both sides.
Yeah, that's what risk and reward is. Yep. And then if you could figure out some sort of a commercial and capital charge model, then you should be up and running with a fantastic model. And that's where I would say digital transformation for a system integration business would happen. Yes, digital transformation for a system integration business is not about, do I have a mobile app to check my payslip or leave balances? For me, the digital transformation for a services company is about how are you innovating, how you sell your own solution, and how you build your own solution. Because that's a core for you. Core is not my payslip or how do I apply for my leaves. That there's a productivity gain and there are easier ways. You outsource your business process to a call center in Gurgaon or in Philippines, you will probably save more money instead of trying to build a lot of mobile applications and RPA with it.
Gaurav, let me ask you a question on what is happening.
Deepak, just one
Okay.
logistic.
Yeah.
So, see, it was an 8 to 9, right? I love going, and Gaurav, I think once we start, we would still keep on going, and there's a lot more to keep talking also. And each of your things, right? I make a note of it so that when I publish the video, I can give, and I've already got some 10 points, okay? So there's no dearth and a lot of nuggets of wisdom, and it's more like experience coming in. 2 questions. Can we go for another half an hour? Do you have the time?
That should be fine. Yeah, so
okay.
we can do that. Yeah.
Okay, so later I will pitch for you to join more often. That's a different thing. I would talk to you later. So, Deepak, you go ahead and then let's give a chance for others to ask what they've been listening to Gaurav. Let them also ask. But go ahead and finish your question, then let others.
Yeah. Okay. So my question was, you see, there is a lot of these large organizations now beginning to do some amount of insourcing, especially with the cloud. Right, and so there's a transition where some of these large organizations, they are figuring out that we don't have enough internal knowledge to even innovate or have enough knowledge of our own applications so that we can actually do something better about it, or even tell a system integrator what to do with it, right? So the system integrator, if we bring in a new system integrator, we always have to start from scratch, and they have to do all this assessment and all this stuff. So what is a trend which you are seeing with this insourcing business?
Sure. A fantastic question, Deepak. And we definitely see that trend in pockets in very specific geographies. Okay? So it's not that I see this trend of insourcing applying everywhere.
So just one, I'm just riding on Deepak's question. Like, it will be kind of related, right? We see a lot of these big companies, right? I think we've been through these decades. 2 decades back, it was offshoring, right? They moved it to another company out. And now you see these big retailers taking the IT back in, right? It's from IT services company, forget it. That didn't work because they are not closely assigned with the business. They really don't care about my business. I am taking my IT back. These are kind of similar questions.
Sure, good, yeah, and they're very much related. You're right. Okay, now I would address it in 2 ways. One is, am I seeing that trend? Answer is yes. Am I seeing it globally? Answer is no. There are pockets where I see it happening. Okay? So, for example, in a market like Australia, I would say every second customer is looking at insourcing as a strategy. Probably customers in Europe are still not looking at that aggressively. They have taken a slightly different approach where they are looking at an intermediate state where they're saying, let's define what offshore means. Is offshore in a different time zone or offshore is near to me? So that they understand the context. So it's like near offshore kind of a concept that Europe is adopting to. US, I would say, is driven by vertical. Across US, it is not that a general trend that I see, but very specific verticals, I do see that. But the way I look at it, especially based on talking to some of the innovators, like I had now his view was, it's not that I want to do insourcing. It's a huge headache for me to do insourcing. None of the global SIs are bringing the transformation at the pace that I need it. My business needs transformation to run like an express train, whereas as a system integrator, you are probably doing a frisk walk. I've seen the other side of the table. Okay, as while at Microsoft, we always had a hypothesis that system integrators are the biggest roadblock in making cloud successful. And I can tell you, okay, like it's getting recorded, but don't quote me on this part. I would say yes, system integrators probably are the biggest roadblock for cloud adoption for a simple purpose, because as cloud gets more and more adopted, it starts eating into our business. On one hand, cloud gives us opportunity, but it is eating a big pie. Okay, so earlier, if for every Windows Server upgrade that I had to do, I could easily charge $400 a server. By doing a managed instance of SQL Server in Azure, Microsoft took away $400 a VM for Windows Server and $2,000 for SQL Server.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, $2,500 a virtual machine gone.
And that is run rate business. It's not even a one-time project kind of a cost.
Yes, it was my annuity business.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, having said that, yes, SIs needs to innovate. That's what I'm saying. As a system integrator, if you're a solution architect in a SI company, your thinking process has to be a little different than a solution architect in an end user company. That's where you have to differentiate that cost.
I think it's more than little. It's like a ground shift, no?
Yes, it is. Okay. Now, the part of your question, Deepak, is reason why customers are doing insourcing is because they are not seeing the speed of transformation. In the presentations, every SI will go and say, I will do a stabilization and start transforming you from month 3, month 6. But that transformation is, let me stabilize my own business. Let me ensure your things run in cloud the way it was running before cloud. And the transformation never happens. By doing insourcing, what they're saying is, let me own my own destiny. By saying, I know my business. Today, if somebody goes to a customer and says, I'm a system integrator and I know about your business more than what you know. Trust me, guys, don't fool ourselves. This customer actually knows what their business is. They probably know the use cases better than any other SI expert that you would see in the field. It's only about they don't have people who can carve out a project around it. So I would say insourcing pattern is yes, but that's not because they want to save money or they want to build their kingdom. That's more because they're seeing SIs or any of this so-called partners of implementation slowing down their transformation. So they want to insource a portion of things. And that gives an opportunity. As if you are an architect in a SI, you have to think, how do you rotate your business to still make money with this insourcing pattern, which is a little different way of doing business as compared to going and selling an end-to-end project. My short answer, insourcing happening, yes, in pockets, but that's because we have not been true as a trusted advisor. If you have been true to your customer as a trusted advisor, as a large outsourcer, I don't think they would have done insourcing.
So, Gaurav, you were saying that ratio of split between the legacy and the buzzword is 60-40, right? But I was just wondering, like, when do you transition a buzzword into a legacy? Because if you see, cloud was once a buzzword. Now that is like become a necessity, at least for all the business, right? So now we are talking about IoT, machine learning. We are talking about a lot of new things that are coming. But I was just wondering, like, how do you transition a buzzword into a this thing? What do you call it? Legacy? Because
or
are you
core,
saying, yeah?
Would you
Exactly,
actually the word is core, or make it mainstream, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
because these days, if you see, we are trying out new things, but we see success on it on a very least scale. We don't see the success the moment we implement, right? All these new things, maybe those are fancier and we are able to try it out, but we don't see it on a long term, is what I feel. So that's what I was saying. Okay, do you transition it basis the revenue or by the market? How do you do it? Because are they really giving you that push across the next couple of years? Are you getting that? Are you seeing that revenue coming down the line?
So very, very interesting question. Okay, from a financial market perspective, the view that we would have would be slightly different than the ratio that I gave you as 60-40. Rather from that perspective, we would say reverse, probably say 70% of our business rotated to new. Okay? And that rotation to new has a different connotation to it. But when I said 60-40, I would say that's primarily based on a couple of parameters. One is how does the hype cycle, okay? So a simple example could be, look at the hype cycle from Gartner. How does some of those technology on that hype curve are becoming reality in the current time, okay? If something is still appearing on the hype cycle down the line 2 years, there is no way I would say that has become my mainstream business. Because reality is it would not have. If somebody got, that might be a bluebird project. So that's one kind of an indication. The other piece definitely in our business or for any other business would be a percentage of revenue that you start building around it. And the third thing that I would say is very, very relevant is how is your pipeline going forward looks for it. Because for something which is a buzzword, your revenue, if you're able to make a revenue in a SI business around a buzzword, that means that buzzword is already in the market for at least 12 months. Okay? So because if some new technology comes today and becomes a buzzword, by the time you'll figure out that how do you package it as a POC, you go and sell that POC to somebody, you execute a POC so that you make a revenue. We're talking about 6-7 months gone. till the time Microsoft itself funds a project and says go and do a technology adoption project, I don't even count that as a project in our business. So it's just not a simple thing. I would say probably 7 or 8 different parameters that we look at. I definitely disclose some 3 or 4 which I think are in public domain. So good function of revenue and hype cycle. I would say those are 2 things that we look at, and third is pipeline.
Hi, this is Jiffin. So, Gaurav, I was listening to you, so I like the idea you mentioned about the keep the lights on versus the innovation, basically. So innovation is more about, when we talk about legacy, it's about resilience. So we had similar kind of discussion when we talked to our legacy projects, like to implement something in order to make things easy. So, but most of the cases we get answers like talking about or improving something on legacy with innovation is always cost.
So the context, just a context, right? Jiffin is with a company which has a product and services. So it's something like sell-through kind of a thing. So he's working in the productized services. So it's the area between a product getting implemented and a managed service. So he's sitting in that space. That's the context. Go ahead, Jiffin.
Yeah. So basically, people are interested to try out with new technologies when they start fresh. But trying out something within the existing ongoing legacy, especially on the resiliency part, there is a lot of pushbacks. So what would be your advice on that? Like how do we approach to tackle the leadership? I mean, we are clear with the background, the benefit which technically getting.
Sure. Is your question more from a pushback that you see from customer in adopting new technology or newer version of your product, or is that question more from a perspective of your own leadership saying, hey, why should I use a new technology within my product?
It's from the customer, because we are also taking care of the services part.
Sure, good. So that
because when we talk to customer, they might think like it's a way of getting new billing, right? So people would push back like, don't touch it, let it go as it is.
Sure. And I can completely correlate, and I'm sure people like Kumran can also. We always had the same challenge. You just came and sold me SQL 2000 and now SQL 2005. Marketing says 40% performance improvement, blah, 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 should be in place upgrade. Okay? Or same happens with Office, with Microsoft, whatever it is. Okay? So that always a challenge, that as a product company, how do you go and monetize some of your newer products, whether it is new functionality or adoption of a new technology? Today I would say some of the thinking process there is, are you able to look at your product business a little differently? That's where most successful models are converting the product business into SaaS model. So I'm not sure about what kind of a model your product is being sold today. But if I look at my portfolio, okay, so I deal with customers where we have helped product companies in solving those challenges, but most of the time answered look like having a version which is software as a service, or some sort of a variant which is a different way of saying, how would I offset some of the cost of newer buzzwords or newer functionality? Because one of the reasons why customer resist is your current version is good enough for me. So you are competing with your own good work by saying that the product is good enough for me. So either SaaS is a good answer, because then you are monetizing it as you're releasing new functionality. You could probably increase your premium because you are not asking customer to take care of some of the infra and upgrade challenges. But the other thing keep in mind is why customer gets into that good enough pattern is because they are worried about the change management. So if you can make the change management problem solving easier for your customer, you would see like less resistance. Whether that change management is for new functionality, new user interface, or for new technology, for customer it is just a simple change management. I've seen customers resisting by saying, though I like your new user interface, it's more responsive, it's much more stuff, whatever it is, but who's going to pay for retraining my users because you have moved your save button from here to here or you have moved your drop down from here to here, which is a huge amount of change management that needs to happen. And sometimes people think change management is only about human, that I have to train 5,000 data entry operators.
What Gaurav are you talking? A new product, 15 minutes orientation, that's all change management done. No, you are exaggerating a problem.
That's true. That's what I would tell my customer if I'm working for a company like Microsoft. Okay? The new version is simple. In-place upgrade works everywhere. But when they ask for a project and say, okay, I have SQL 2016 sitting, upgrade it to 2019, MCS will walk in and say $1 million, though it's in-place upgrade. Okay? So that's how sometimes companies has to be realistic. That's why I'm saying change management is the problem that definitely you need to look at. That if you can make the change management easier or as free as possible for customer, then you would not see resistance for your new upgrades, new functionality. And
I think that's an interesting point, right? I kind of just want to highlight what Gaurav just said, right? I think as architects, I think majority of them are still stuck with technology. I will beat technology. I will throw Java code, Angular code, Python code, and then I will do it. But I guess the key point which Gaurav is telling, it's actually the point beyond code, which actually causes the resistance. It's actually not the technology, but the other aspect of that. Maybe Gaurav, some example, right? Like how you kind of eased that pain.
Sure. I'll give you an example. Okay. So while I said most of the time, my success scenarios for product companies that I deal with is converting them to platform as a service, software as a service. I'll give you a very simple example. I just lost my thought. Just give me a sec. I just want to be sure that I'm disclosing something which I can't.
As Gaurav is talking, right, I'll tell a couple of things. It's also the ability to take a chance. So one common thread, as Gaurav is talking, right, one recurring thread as you see as he's talking is one, you got to keep learning and trying new things. The existing thing won't work. Okay, whether it's certification or new way of selling or architecting a cloud solution, that is one. And the ability, and if you look at it, right, even for certification change, the change management, he was not like sending 3 more discussions or more PowerPoints, right? Actually did something to show people how it can be easily done. And another example of change management, in his case itself, he said, if you fail, I will get you another voucher, don't worry. That's another example of change management, certification being the core thing.
And a marketing guy would have said, I created a psychologically safe environment for that employees. By telling them, don't worry about the failure. Okay, so that's like a normal English. A philosophical guy would have said, I created a psychologically safe environment for my employees to work. Okay, so coming back to Jiffin, what you said, the example that I can easily talk about is, see, with the new technology, we keep on saying, let's implement DevOps and things like that. So bundle a little bit of aspect of DevOps, make the change management easier. Okay. We picked up that what was the mean time between the new functionality from the day they asked. Okay, so if today a customer says, I need functionality ABC on day 1, and if it took 6 weeks for us to develop that functionality and give it to customer, and then they adopted that and a change management, which would remain constant. The way we worked is, Mr. Customer, if you stay with the current version, today takes 6 weeks. As it is becoming legacy, that 6 week is going to probably become 7 weeks or 8 weeks, but it is not becoming 5. But if you adopt my new product, which is on new technology, new platform, then I'm willing to commit that your new functionality can come to you in 3 weeks instead of 6 weeks. So as a product company, you are making the business agility aspect real for them. But that would happen provided in your new product, you have done few changes which allows you to make that functionality faster.
Yeah, that's really, because when we talk with the present, but when we try to relate with the future, that's become more versatile situation. Yeah, that's an easy relation.
And then you can bring in aspect of little bit of financial engineering with it. Okay, that for your, on average, you have 20 change requests for new functionality today, which takes 6 weeks, and then a change management aspect anyway that happens. That comes to X dollars. In the new world, if that reduces to 50%, you are saving some money.
True.
And that money probably should be able to offset the big portion of the big change management for the version upgrade. So you could bundle. So the key message, one key takeaway that I would say is, as an architect, do that financial engineering. Package your stuff that I am saving you money from this pocket. How would I help you putting in the other pocket? Do that financial engineering. That probably is the missing piece that most of the time people struggle with. And
yeah, that's
DevOps
true.
is easy. You can always talk about DevOps, business agility, and things like that. But if you package it to solve a business problem for you as a product company and bring in a little bit aspect of financial engineering to it, and then I'm sure you can figure out without re-envisioning your product as a SaaS.
Yeah,
Other
understand.
thing that you could look at is there are companies who can SaaSify your product. If you start searching for SaaSification or SaaSify, you would find sufficient architecture, sufficient companies for a small price. They can convert your product to be a SaaS-enabled product.
Yeah,
And that could be your do some investment but make a new revenue stream.
okay.
Kumaran, I have a question for Gaurav.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Gaurav, as you mentioned about financial engineering, I just want to add another point to it. Now that I see most of the large enterprises having multi-cloud, architectures, wherein they have Azure, they have AWS, they have OCI, and a couple of more, maybe even their own local flavors. I would want to understand, how does this add more challenge to the financial engineering that you're talking about? Yeah.
Okay, very, very interesting question, Siddhima. So, see, from a financial engineering perspective, definitely it brings in an aspect of, if you are in a business of monetizing your product on multiple clouds, and your application or your product is not multi-cloud enabled. So if, let's say, you have a fairly old .NET application which cannot be containerized, then you would have to look at a completely different financial engineering, because your own cost would be different to make it work on Azure and AWS. But if today somebody throws a challenge to me with respect to multi-cloud, I would tell my customer today, don't do anything about multi-cloud for another 3 months, 6 months. Because the way I see, okay, this is me always, like one thing that I always do is I always make a lot of hypotheses about what I observe in the market. I have a hypothesis today, guys, which is about, it's not possible for any of this hyperscaler to have data center in every major city and every country. Day is not far when you would see Microsoft having, or let's say any hyperscaler A having an arrangement with hyperscaler B and saying, give me 30% of a capacity in your data center. And they would run and do white labeling. That's the commercial aspect of looking at it.
It's like
But
sharing shell towers.
Okay. Yes. Okay. And that's what probably VMware did with AWS. If today you look at a VMware on AWS solution, that's what they did. They said, instead of building my own data center, AWS, you give me 30% capacity in your specific data center that they were interested, pre-block 30% capacity, and they run everything VMware. So imagine this 4 big hyperscaler, Microsoft, AWS, Ali, and Google, trying to do that kind of a commercial contract. Guess what? Even if this hypothesis of mine fail, okay, which I would love to be proven wrong if that doesn't happen in next 18 months or so. But then you have technologies like Anthos, or what Microsoft is doing as Azure Arc. I'm not sure if you tracked, okay? But what Microsoft demonstrated 3 days back is you can go and provision Azure Database Platform as a Service capability on AWS. Forget about your own on-premise or Azure stack. So today, for people who understand, let's say a very simple scenario of Azure SQL Database as a Service running in Azure PaaS, using Azure Arc, I can go and provision Azure Database as a Service running in Platform as a Service mode on AWS and Google. Microsoft would ensure the SQL instances are getting updated with their latest patches and things like that, which is saying, even if commercial aspect of my hypothesis doesn't work, technology is maturing where people would brute force way with a design principle of public cloud, which says every public cloud provider needs to have public APIs to do whatever they want to do for provisioning, automation, and management. Using that concept, Microsoft is doing completely a different game, saying forget about me creating Kubernetes and OpenShift and things like that. I'm going to use your capability, AWS, to do patch management and provisioning for my database as a service components. Fantastic capability. So Siddhim, I would say financial engineering could be different if you are a product company, but if you are a customer, I would say don't look at financial engineering. Look at a different way. Don't fall into a trap of saying, let me take a minimum viable product across multiple clouds. So the moment I'm looking at things like Kubernetes cluster or any other equivalent technology, what I'm doing is I'm leaving away the fantastic capabilities that each of the cloud provider provides, but I'm taking a minimum viable product out of each one of them and putting everything in Kubernetes. And then you keep on orchestrating the Kubernetes cluster based on a business rule. This is, if today AWS gives me 30% discount, I would run my Kubernetes cluster for all application on AWS. Tomorrow Microsoft gives me 5% more. I will move my Kubernetes cluster from AWS to Azure. You could do that financial engineering too.
So I think the collaborative ecosystem is somehow going to evolve, and it's going to be very competitive as well. Very competitive.
So yeah, price point competitiveness is one part. I'm saying today, if I'm a customer, if I see AWS gives me better rate, better resiliency, but my application can run fantastic with Azure Platform as a Service capability for databases or for app services and things like that, doesn't matter. I would run Microsoft's Platform as a Service capability inside AWS.
From the cloud provider's perspective, it is ease with which you are able to adopt their platform.
Interoperate, yes.
And I'm not talking about a science project. I'm sure that all Ignite sessions are available for free watch. Go search for Azure Arc. You would see demos. You will see things working live.
I think what you just said, right? I think we are at time I'm just trying to rephrase whatever you just said. There was a time when we had a monolith system, then we went to client server, and then we had distributed system, and then it's kind of to a place where we have these different components and we kind of connect them, right? It's like you don't build everything cloud up. Cloud is again at that. I don't build my data server. Now, similarly, when you go to functional things, if you look at whether it is within the Microsoft world, you take Power Automate, Power BI. And I was incidentally, Gaurav, I talked about measures. That was something so scary for me. For the past 3 months, I've been working on Power BI and getting measures, right? Now, I can actually build a very small data model and facts and visualization without having a server. So it's about building the existing, and currently I'm a business user. Okay, I'm not a technologist at all. Now, something like Power, if I can use a component like Power Automate, Flow, and Power BI and Microsoft Forms to create a solution, this is at a very app level. But what you're talking, the same thing goes at a cloud level. I have different cloud capabilities. Now I can cross-connect them across different service providers. And probably architects move to that, they can add more value and play with finance or capability, things like that. Is that?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so the way I said, I shared my hypothesis. Okay, another hypothesis that I have is, down the line 2 years, you would have graphical tools to build your application across cloud platforms as a service capability.
Oh, yeah.
So think about sitting in Visio, you would drop and say, I need a user interface based on React running with serverless technology of AWS, but for database, I would trust what Microsoft provides, but for my analytics, I would trust BigQuery. You drop those components in Visio and say generate code and deployment scripts.
Yeah. And actually, Gaurav, I think you might have seen Zapier, right? The one with BizTalk, where we used to spend literally months, now actually takes minutes.
Yes.
I guess, and as I think it's not too far off. Gautam,
and it's becoming reality. Another thing which scares me is how AI is going to start playing as a role. Okay, an alternate solution to Power Apps, Kumran.
Okay.
On a Surface Hub device, using a research project of Microsoft, you draw what you need on a Surface Hub. Click a button and say generate my React application against it.
Okay.
So using a Surface Pen, you are saying my screen should look like this.
Okay.
And you generate your entire code right for UX, application, database, everything.
Gautam, are you smiling? You don't have to depend on IT vendors anymore.
True.
Yeah.
So things are going to change. So when Kumran told me let's join this, I said fine, I can answer the question, but that gives me a platform to talk about some of my hypotheses. And I always love to be proven wrong on my hypothesis based on the timeline that I define.
I think we've gone well beyond time. Thanks, Gaurav, for joining, and probably I think depending on your frequency, I'll keep coming back to you. And I think also the interesting thing is our thought process also keeps evolving, right? And we definitely have more things to share. I think we should do more of this. Thanks all for joining, and it was great. We could go on, but keeping everybody's time, I'd only taken 1 hour from Gaurav. It's become like more than 40 minutes, and I had the reputation of going beyond time, right? And thanks, Gaurav. Thanks a lot. I mean, a lot of insights, and I think what's interesting is each of these things can be hour-long discussions by themselves, right? There's so many intricacies and nuances to each of them. Any other quick thoughts anybody else would like to share?
This is Sundar. I just have a quick question. Again, like with the rapid, is it okay to ask?
Yeah, go ahead, Sundar.
Okay, sir. So, okay, fine. So with the rapid change, right, with the technology and all that, like how do we keep ourselves updated? So basically, to give a context, right, I always wanted to be like an architect, right? Still I can solve technical problem, I work on it, I help the team solve. But let's say that when I go to, for example, an interview, they would definitely, or the organization would expect that I should have worked on that specific technology, while maybe I have not worked on it, but I know how to solve the technical problems and all that. So how do I present myself, or how do I keep up
how do I make myself influential?
Yes. How can I meet that their expectation in terms of, because without like working on it, we may not be able to clear the interview, but can solve the problems.
Sure, very interesting question. Okay, now definitely as a professional, some point of time it's about, I'm doing fantastic with some of the learning patterns that I described in the beginning. But what about when I want to change my job? Because my interviewer would start asking me questions which might be in my uncomfortable zone. Because in the interview, you can't go and tell and say, I know 5 people who are expert on Power Platform and another 5 on ESB. Okay, that's not going to work in the interview. Personally, I would probably not like to join a company where in the interview loop they ask me that question. That's one part of it. Okay? But having said that, I would answer what you asked for. Okay. See, one is, if you pick up the art of asking the right questions to your network, you would never feel you have not worked on it. And key for that is to establish a discipline, a little bit of a discipline wherein you could use any kind of a scheduling tool that you want to use. And this is what I do. Okay, so if today I would talk to somebody, okay, so let me give a real example. 2 days back, Microsoft announced Azure Communication Services. Fantastic capability, because that's what is powering everything around Teams, which is the hotcake product in the market. I understand the business value of it, but do I have time to learn about it? Probably not. What I figured out is who is my best expert to pick up, or who would have interest in doing something like that. Schedule some time with that resource and say, this what you think, how would we monetize, how the things look like based on whatever Microsoft announced a couple of days back. And I learned something about how do we monetize and things like that, challenges, limitations, so which we'll solve. That's the other part. But then I set up a time which says, let's connect after 3 weeks and see how do we learn a little bit more about it in reality. And that's where I said I'm fortunate that I can carve out a side project. After 3 weeks, I'm sure we connect and we would learn about whatever proof of concept, hands-on lab, or if you want to call it a hello world, you would do that. And then you just go and pick up whatever code has been generated. And if in that code, even if you can recompile that code, deploy it on a different machine and get the application working, you would be smart enough to crack your interview loop also.
Beautiful, yeah.
So you don't have to learn every damn thing. You just need to ask the right question and to keep your hands on. Just get into a habit of saying, okay, let's have a look at that code. Can I compile it? Can I make a small change in it? And that small change could be very simple, saying, if let's say somebody wants to learn React, okay, can I move a save button from right bottom to the top bottom and still get the page working? Very simple thing. Yeah. Try that. You would learn enough to crack an interview loop. Other thing that I would do is think about it. If your interview, see, sometimes people fail in interview not because you gave the wrong answer. Sometimes you fail the interview because the person who was taking the interview was not even having the IQ level as what you had. So don't take sometimes your interview failure as negative, because look for a pattern. Was the person had a IQ similar to you. And then you could start applying concept of little bit of AI, that how do you start leveraging AI to start looking at your IQ and matching it with your interview. You would exactly know that whether you want to tell that person a story that how you can use AI to solve a business problem versus saying keep it simple, use Power Automate or RPA to solve a problem. Both the answers are right. You can use Power Automate to do any damn thing that you want to do, or you could apply AI and machine learning to solve the same problem. But if your interviewer doesn't know how AI and ML works, if you give that answer, you're going to fail it. I would say do a little bit of a research, elevate your response accordingly.
Yeah. Nice point.
So thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, Gaurav. It was very interesting. Thanks very much for the tips. And Gaurav, so if there is any so back to the, I'll go to the cloud platform. So is there any checklist we can do before choosing any platform, like any cloud?
Okay, so Venkat is he's the engineering lead for an agro startup in Chennai, Gaurav. So he has a team of around 10-15 people. So that's the context of his question.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the thing like, do we have you remember that magic checklist, do I need to do .NET or SharePoint? Kind of similar question.
See, I can give you a technology answer and I can give you a practical answer to it. Okay, technology answer would be look at a decision tree. You would find few decision trees available in free domain, and some decision tree that you might find which could be a little bit of paid money that you could get across. But more practical answer for me, especially if you are in a startup mode, is go with any of this public cloud provider, whomsoever is willing to give you cloud free for next 24 months.
Okay.
Because most of them would be willing to give it free for 3 months, 6 months. If go and bargain and say 3 months, 6 months doesn't work with me. Give me cloud coverage free for next 24 months. Whomsoever gives it to you, go with them.
Simple.
Yeah. Thank you. It works, right? So will they give actually if we demand?
My experience
Depends on your bargaining power.
Okay.
I would say whenever I have played with as an advisor with some of the startups, I've never seen that failing. Worst case that I've seen is a 18-month, which is still a very good bargain. That for 18 months, all my cloud consumption is free.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting.
actually, it
Thank
didn't
you.
strike me, but that's a great point, Gaurav. And if you look at it for a large company, they have an evangelist, and if the startup comes good, it's good for them. And anyway, being a startup, it's not that they're going to lose a lot of resources with that. Correct? So the chances of getting that is great. Thanks, Gaurav. Great. It was fun. I didn't know quite a bit of time. One of those old days where we used to have so many conversations. Looking forward to pulling you in more into our conversations. And
Sure.
probably I think it might get a little more fun also is even if we take one subtopic and go delve, right? That's a different kind of fun. You kind of dissect everything into pieces and then see how that happens. Here we were like spread across.
Yeah.
Sure.
We can do that on ETI.
Sure. Pleasure is all mine, Kumran. So always good to connect with you and some of the industry folks. And I hope you found it useful. And Kumran, we can connect. Let's figure out if it makes sense, you see value, then I'm happy to come back.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Kumaran, Nishant here. Just I think one main takeaway we all have here is like at least we got the series of topics for the upcoming.
Oh yeah, yes, correct.
Actually, we all were struggling to find topic, especially you, right?
Yeah, correct. Now I have a lot of topics. So, Gaurav, it's
Yeah,
usually like
yeah.
this, right? How do we do that? Is no.
Yeah.
We either Friday night or Saturday morning. I kind of look at past 2 weeks. What is the problem that I have faced, or I have heard from people who I'm working with? Pick that topic and have a discussion around it. So it's more closer. And one of the things which I wanted to have in this is, I didn't want it to be a Gyan session. There are enough Gyan sessions outside, right? It's more about how do I apply it. Okay, microservices is great, but as a startup or as a project which is a legacy project, how can I implement it? So we kind of try to get it to that. How do you apply kind of a thing? So lot of points around that. Execution essentially.
Yeah, Kumaran, I have just one question. Shall I ask, or it's already?
Anyway, it's gone. I'm sure. Okay, go on.
Yeah. Gaurav,
It's probably
Mr. Nishant.
last question. Yeah, probably
Last
question.
one. Yeah, last question.
Yeah. Let me introduce myself. Myself, Nishant. Actually, I'm working in IBIS Software. It's a leading company in travel, transportation, and logistics domain. And so basically, my question is about since we all discussed about this, like building an application, especially let's say a scenario we have to build a product and deploy it in a cloud service. So what would be the formula or the things that we need to consider, especially when we have to build a product with all this new buzzword kind of components within, like this? Let's say we have an IoT or an ML or AI component in it. In such a scenario, should we go for consuming the managed service of respective cloud provider, or we have to build those components from the scratch? What all should be the criteria, whether it's purely the time to market or our skill set or the final cost and the revenue aspect? I don't know whether it's a big topic to.
Definitely. I think question is fairly broad, very very relevant question for companies who are in startup mode or product development.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would be able to do justice with a small question with this, Kumran.
So let's do one thing. We'll hold that as a topic.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's fine.
Let me just. I'll make a note of that question. So it's basically, your question is like, when we are let's say when I'm designing a product, right? How do we fit buzzwords, features, and functionality, right, to get the right mix?
Yeah, and the important thing is whether we have to, in a simple way, whether we have to build or buy, right? Whether we have to build it as a cloud agnostic feature, or we have to use the managed service provided by the respective cloud provider or service provider. Okay.
So I'll make a note of that. We will have that as a separate discussion topic itself, because as Gaurav said, it's pretty big.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. All right. Thanks, Gaurav. Great catching up with you. Looking forward to catching up with you some other time.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, guys.
We should have Gaurav at least once a month.
Yeah, I guess so. Thanks, Gaurav.
Thanks, Gaurav.
Thank you.
Thank you.